So Russ and I were sitting next to each other yesterday in the Flyers game, which was another game where the Flyers just, I mean, gosh, if they have any
steamroll's a good word.
They were steamrolled, but they played better than they deserved, and it was just they had no luck whatsoever. 2 disallowed goals. Anyway, one was disallowed because it hit the crossbar, and the funny thing about that, so that's not really a disallowed goal, but they called it a goal on the ice. So the crowd, when they clearly show the video on the board of the goal, of the puck hitting the crossbar, even though all the players put their arms up and the referee pointed to the goal, and it's like, but and the fans are booing the crossbar, and
we're like, boo the crossbar. It was great.
Really boo about this, fans. It's like this puck hit the crossbar. It's like you can't go to the referees after field review, like freaking out. So anyway, Russ and I are sitting there, and a couple things happened, and we had a long discussion about Mike and his willingness to sell off his depth defenseman, and that's what you're doing. So and then we sat there and we said we needed an intervention, and we think that you're just reflective of other Leaf fans. So this is the intervention that we're having today, and that the intervention is this: it's okay to win.
No,
because it's not. No, wait. We got to listen to this figure. We know it. We know it doesn't feel like it. We know it's been a long time since it's happened, but it is okay to win, and it's okay to actually want to win.
The goal of any organization is to win the Stanley Cup, not to sneak into the playoffs and get trounced in the first round.
No.
Yeah.
Yes.
You've fallen off the dock on this one, Mike.
No, but they don't seem to understand my viewpoint.
You don't understand. You don't understand. No, you can't stand the truth.
Oh, you don't understand.
3 against 1, Mike.
That you're dealing with Lamoriello, Babcock, and Shanahan. 3 guys who are okay preaching pain to everybody, but down are unbelievably competitive.
I get that, and I'm all for that. And I'm not saying, okay, what I am saying here is you are in year 2 of the rebuild. And this organization, Lamoriello, Shanahan, and Babcock, are not going to go out and expend future assets to trade for rentals. And if they find an opportunity to trade a depth defenseman like a Roman Polak, who's an expiring contract, when they have a kid like Alexei Marchenko, or they have Martin Marincin, who they've played for most of the last 2 years, and they can get a draft pick, and it's not going to significantly affect their run to a playoff spot, Lou Lamoriello is going to do that. Plus, he's going to use that $17 million in cap space probably to take on some dead money and to get more assets.
This year is not over. This year is still happening.
Right. I realize that.
Well, I mean, what I would say about it is this. Like, I think that these are the truths. The Maple Leafs are farther ahead than they expected to be.
Right, exactly.
They have an okay, not great, an okay shot at making the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
This year's draft, and in terms of rating it and comparing it to others' draft, is below average. So this year's draft picks, according to everybody who's part of it, except for there's always about 10 people who don't understand what it means to have a below average draft, and always say, well, there are good players out there. Well, there are always good players out there. There's never been a draft when they didn't bring some players out of the draft, but this is a below average draft. So when you factor all that in, what I would say is that you lean toward making a run for the playoffs, and if all you're going to get is a 4th round pick in this year's draft, and you can keep your veteran player like Polak, who is better than the guy who's behind them, you keep him.
Yeah.
I think
here's the only thing I'll say as a caveat, and it's not to slam Kevin, but
that's all I have to say. You've been Kevin.
When I came out with my draft list, I toiled over for 2 hours because of the amount of guys that could have fit in between like 20 and 45 in this draft. Like I think it's deeper than people realize. I just think
no, don't start that.
Kevin, it is.
First of all, let me explain.
Here we go.
And this happens every year at this.
February 22nd.
It does.
People do not understand what it's meant when people say it's a below average draft. Okay. And every year I go through this with readers and I try to explain this. And it's ever since social media come out. The guys who do this for a living, the guys that understand how the draft works, they assess a draft based on the averages that they see coming out of the draft. And so most of them have plenty of experience on how this all works. They know, for example, that X amount of players comes out of the 7th round and the 6th round and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So when they look at a draft, they say, okay, like last year's draft, everybody knew that there were like 60 players or whatever it was that everybody was excited about, and there were a lot of high-end players at the top. So when they say it's a below-average draft, that doesn't mean that nobody's coming out of the draft. And always when people say that, and it's an accurate assessment, most people think this is a below-average draft because the top-end guys aren't as exciting as the top-end guys that we've seen in the past. It's harder to figure out the difference between the 4th guy and the 25th guy. Now, that doesn't mean those guys may not make it. It just means it's harder to project, because of that. But it doesn't mean there won't be players coming out of this draft. There's players that come out of every draft. So always when the general population says, well, it's a little below average draft, like if they thought that it was a horrible draft, we wouldn't even hold it. But we do. We hold the draft every year, even if it's below average. So so here's what happens. So every year when it's below average, 5 scouts always say, oh, there's guys in this draft, I think it's better. Or someone else says, well, that's true. I mean, it's the safest statement you can make because there's always good guys. But when this draft is said and done, based on the averages, it'll probably be a little below average. That, in terms of the number of players that come out of it. That doesn't mean there won't be any players. It just means there'll be less. So I like, it's real easy to say, well, you're going to find some players. It's like what they say, Ken Holland always says is like, if we really thought Pavel Datsyuk was as great a player as we get credit for, we would probably take him in the 1st round, but we didn't. We
Sure, but it's a little different now than then. That's for sure.
Well, and then the other element to it is like GM's always telling me this. Always in the end of the draft, you're into the final round, and you always say, well, who's got a guy? And like everybody goes like, I love this kid. He's great. He's going to be good. And he says, what we know is 3 or 4 of those guys are going to be right about the guy, and the 26 others are going to be wrong because that's the percentages. So, I just, I get that.
Here's what I'll fight, Kevin. If you want to come up with a number and say how many guys you think will play 100 games or less in the NHL, and then say let's say it's less than 50, then I'll look at it and say, okay, that's when I'll decide if it's a below average draft or not. But I think
that's how everybody looks at it. That's not the way you just do it.
There's no real way of knowing that today. You always have to look at it down the road. But I look at the amount of players, and yes, I understand it's not as strong as the Matthews draft, but I think this draft will surprise people. I pointed out on Twitter like a week ago, like an old Hockey News article saying, and I forget which draft it was, that it was going to be really weak, and it wasn't. Actually, it was the exact opposite. And so, like, I think there's definitely a fine line between the two, but I'm willing to say this is not a below-average draft, but I don't think it's what it was the year before. That's true.
Yeah. Well, I think people disagree with you on that, but I think
they do, and that's okay.
But all it really comes down to is you just need to look at the averages, and every team uses a different standard of how many games play in the NHL in terms of making it. But I mean, it's an inexact science because you're just projecting. But there are averages that have been worked out. I mean, most teams have an idea of what the odds are that you're going to get a player in the 1st round, the 2nd round, and 3rd round, and they use that.
How many players?
It always just amuses me every year that always when people say it's below average, somebody will always say, "Oh no, I think there's more." Well, you know what? You're probably going to be right because there's because there's plenty of players that come out of every draft.
Well, this is what I think is happening here, and I think you're both right because I've heard both of you arguing to a degree, and this is why I think what I think is going on here is we have to scientifically define what the hell we mean by below average because if you're going to say it's not a draft that has as many first-line NHL players as the last draft, okay, you can say that this is below average in first-liners, right? But I talked to a scout the other day who told me that every draft is better than the last draft because just players are training and better than they've ever been before. He said basically what happens is, it just continually gets better overall. He says the talent coming out overall is better because players are just getting better. They're training better. They're more in shape. That's why you see more players jump in quicker. He's like, so every draft has, and what I think what I think goes on though is when we tend to talk to people about the draft, they're talking about the first round and they're talking about, that they're talking about the star players. And when you talk about, especially when we're in where we are right now, which is talking about, are we going to trade a pick for the draft? That's when you're really talking about the first round, because trading third round picks and fourth round picks and stuff like that, every team believes that I can get the same guy at 65 that I can get at 90.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And I've had GMs say, now nobody wants to give up a first round pick. Now, especially now in a salary cap area, you never want to give up a first round pick. But I think you're more apt to do it in a year like this than you would have done in an Austin Matthews or a Connor McDavid draft here.
Right.
I mean, I think that speaks to the idea of this draft being below average. I think there's a willingness, more of a willingness to move picks this year than we saw last year when everybody was raving about the draft or the year before. Now, saying that, nobody likes giving away draft picks because you need those guys to survive.
Right, and everybody wants to say, and because no one has a definitive feel on this thing as to who's going to be the best. But I mean, the only way to really judge a draft, to me, if we want to go below and above average, is how many players play in the NHL. I wish we.
That's why I used the 100-game mark.
Well, that is available out there. I mean, it just
so you go back in time and
you have to go back. You have to wait like 3 to 5 years, usually 5 years, and you go back and see how many players played 100 games.
Okay, right.
I think Hockey Reference, if you look it up right now, has the first round picks and tells how many games they played in the NHL going all the way back.
I want to go through the whole draft and do that. I would like to know, not just the first rounders. I want to know how many.
Well, that's out there. Most teams have that.
Yeah, because I think.
They have.
Yeah, I mean that to me is how you judge if a draft is below or above average. Because only.
Well, that's why every year before the draft, you hear someone writes the story, and it's always an interesting story because I can never remember the percentages, but it's 50% for the first round, it's 25% for the second round, and it goes down and so forth. Although, as I could be wrong on this, and maybe some of our listeners actually have that because it's every year I see it. But it seems to me like once you get to the later rounds, the percentages are just the same. Like you're just as likely in the seventh round to find one as the fifth round.
There's some. I remember seeing something like the sixth round is oddly a good round. There's
been something, but it's probably not mathematically.
Yeah, it's not statistically significant.
Yeah.
But I think that's a big.
Just because while you guys were talking, I looked at the 2012 draft, and right now in the 2012 draft, 20 players of the 30 selected have played over 100 NHL games.
Right, and
that's 2/3.
Yeah,
and that's a really good number, and that's only the first round.
Yeah, because it seems to me for some reason I have 50% for the first round, but in my head,
that may be the year that the Hockey News wrote about that when they previewed the draft, saying it wasn't going to be that good. And that's what, and I posted the article, and I didn't, like I said, it just, I could find these articles every year, and every year people jump the gun on it.
Yeah, so I think defining the draft is the problem, because I think that's really hard. We don't have a way of defining it, and the only way to do that would be to go through the last 20-some drafts and find out how many players made the NHL from every one of them and come up with an average, and then we would tell you if this is a below average or above average draft.
But we wouldn't know, for sure until
right away. You'd have to wait a while. But
but I think the biggest thing is, I think a lot of teams don't believe that this is a harder draft to predict.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of players who are the same. I mean, like this is the year. I know I talked to Dan Marr of Central Scouting. He had a real interesting observation. Like he felt like maybe this is the year. Like if you have an organizational philosophy of the type of players you want, like maybe this is the year that you just take players that fit that philosophy, because it's that there's some sameness from whatever maybe pick 20 and pick 40 on the list. Have in your mind sort of an equal chance of making it. So you might as well take the guy that fits into what you're trying to do.
Or if you're a team that has an organizational need at a certain position, that might. Say, for example, Buffalo or Toronto, I'm sure that, if there is a forward there that's way above on their list, they'll do that. But they both need defense. And if Toronto and Buffalo's pick comes up in the first round and there's a defenseman who's equally rated to a forward, I think they'll go defense instead of forward.
I mean, whoever constructs the best draft board clearly wins, only because what ends up happening is, and we'll take a team like the Sharks as an example, like, and I'll use Kevin LeBanc. Like, how did he fall to the 6th round? Well, obviously, when other teams pass on certain guys that you have on the board, they're helping you because now they're letting you push the guy that you want further back and further back. That's really the way it works. So it is about what teams are looking for. It's just that some teams are really good at what they're looking for and some are flawed. That's all.
I got my bell working again. I have to break in with something here. Okay, I am hearing that San Jose is closing in on Patrick Sharp. I was just texted this, that's coming. There's one other team still involved, and the person I talked to said that's either Chicago or the Islanders, but they think that San Jose is going to get him.
That's all. The only issue on Patrick Sharp is his salary cap hit. You know, it's over $5 million, but
close to 6. Yeah.
I guess so they have to keep
probably is still a 20-goal scorer. Don't you guys agree? I mean,
no, and especially if you're a team like San Jose went to the Stanley Cup Finals last year, Patrick Sharp's a good guy to have. Like,
he is a good guy to have. He's
scoring,
And it's not obviously he's a rental, so it's not a lengthy commitment. And we know San Jose, you've got Thornton, you got Marlowe, who are UFAs. I mean, at least Thornton is definitely going to be back, but you've got that sort of short window right now with those guys, so it would make some sense for them to make that kind of move. Although I've always thought that they were going to make an addition at the deadline. It was going to be another defenseman because I think the bottom end of their defense is not exactly strong.
No, but nobody's is. Like, I think you could live with that. I think what hurt San Jose in the Cup last year when I was covering it was after their top 6, they weren't getting enough offensive production. And I think once some of those guys got shut down by Pittsburgh, it was a problem for them. You add someone like Sharp, and let's say he is on your 3rd line, that's a problem for teams that now face you.
Right. And this is a good guy to have if you're going to face like the Penguins or the Capitals again in the finals.
Yeah, no question.
I would agree. And Sharp's a good guy too. And he's got a championship pedigree. So if it's not the Sharks who get him, anybody who gets him, I think he's a guy worth having. And I thought the only reason that I didn't have him among my top rentals is that his salary cap hit is just a little harder to fit in. There's less. I saw Pierre LeBrun, the fine hockey writer, ESPN, made a really interesting point. There's probably less cap space available than has ever been before at this time, and that's a really sort of valid point. And it's that's why I think everybody's scrambling around. That's why a guy like Patrick Eaves is even more valuable than he would normally be because he's only $1 million prorated,
right?
And a guy like Kyle Quincy is another guy who I think he's 1.25 million. So when you prorate that, you can fit him in. I mean, basically, he's almost the best possible salary you can find for a player.
Well, which I think lends in the next 5 or 6 days to I refer to it as cap calisthenics because you're bending over backwards to create room, and as we've seen from the 2 deals that have just happened in the last couple days. Arizona had to retain 50% of the salary of Michael Stone to get the deal done, and now today the Hainsey deal, the Hurricanes had to retain 50% of his salary, which was not a really big salary. It was less than $3 million, but they had to retain $1.4 million to make that deal work for Pittsburgh. I think you're going to see more of that, and I go back to the whole Toronto scenario by them putting Lupul, Robidas, and Horton on long-term injury, opening up $14 million in cap space. It just basically lends itself to Lou Lamoriello putting out the word to the entire league. I got cap space for sale, folks, and I think that's one of the things that he's going to do.
I'll tell you this. I was going to point out that Carolina did well by getting Christo as a throw-in because when Pittsburgh picked him up, he was a former first-rounder who was really good. He was really good in North Dakota. Then he got frostbite on his foot, and it was a question as to how good he'd ever be again. And he still has speed. He was just starting to pick it up in Scranton-Wilkes-Barre, and I think this is the kind of guy where Carolina, at 26 years old, can give a shot to make their lineup at some point. And I think as a throw-in, that's a heck of a throw-in because speed is everything in the game. Cristo has it, and he just hasn't gotten his shot, and you never know. And so I think I like what Francis got as an add in there.
Now, speaking of that, though, I when I saw Cristo, I was shocked that he's already 26 years old. Like, you know how, when I was putting together my free agent list for the summer, I noted that Gagne, for example, still under 30. And it seems like Gagne's been around for a decade and a half.
It really does.
Yeah. Cristo, seems to me, was just a prospect yesterday. And then I look at he's 26 years old. I always think it's kind of funny how certain guys, you never quite have their age right. And I was stunned to read that Cristo was already 26 years old.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy? Oh, my gosh. That really is. I would never have
That
thought.
was the Ottawa draft. I remember we were doing a show, and we had mentioned Danny Cristo's name, and he was being meant. I said, "Oh, look, Danny Cristo's walking by," and he was going from like point A to point B in the gauntlet, and he stopped to do like a Rob Van Dam with like his name with Cristo on the back, and it was pretty funny, and the fans started yelling. So that's my real good memory of Danny Cristo.
I like this trade from the Penguins' perspective, though. I mean, when you look at it,
One second, guys.
yeah.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Okay, Hainsey has been playing 20 to 22 minutes for Carolina, and is a real reliable defenseman. And Mata will be back by the playoffs. He's out another 5 weeks, and Hainsey is really just kind of going to be an insurance defenseman. Boy, what an insurance defenseman to have! I mean, almost 900 games of NHL experience. A guy that's been around the block. The only thing is, the oddity, of course, about Hainsey is he's never played in a playoff game.
Yeah,
which is truly just a nutty statistic when you think about it.
Sure,
it's fortunate that this bad luck happened on February 22nd and 23rd than it did on March the 22nd, because Schultz with the concussion, Mata with the broken hand, Daly now out 6 weeks with a knee, I believe. Jim Rutherford was able to get this deal and bring in Hainsey. Maybe he even has another move up his sleeve to bring in another defenseman, because, you don't know how effective these players are going to be. Obviously with concussions, it's always a thing that's up in the air. But, they're close. They have a chance to repeat, and I think they're going to pull out all the stops to get their the best chance to win again.
Yeah, well, and it's the right thing to do. And I still think Rutherford, the top two traders in the NHL in terms of aggressiveness and boldness are Rutherford and David Poile, and it's not coincidence that both of them are two of the most experienced guys. They came from a different era where we hear all the time now in the salary cap era that it's hard to make deals, and that is the truth. But these guys somehow always figure out a way to do it, like with no limited cap space. Rutherford needed help. He needed a defenseman, and he went out and figured out, got them to accept half the salary or not, or to retain half the salary, and got it done, and got a player who has been a very effective player for.
Well, Rutherford had Hainsey before. He knows him, and he's good.
Yeah.
He can play on the power play. He's good in the room. I also think Pittsburgh can get away with playing like a guy like Warsofsky for 6 weeks too. And if they have to, it's not going to kill him. He can move the puck. He has offensive ability. They're not going to use him on the power play, even though he can do it. So I think they may not get another defenseman, but I still think they're going to have to at some point figure out this goalie situation. They may not do it until the end of the season, but Eck and I were talking about it yesterday, and until Marc-Andre Fleury says, "Hey, I'll waive my no trade," they still may be trading Matt Murray at some point.
Well, they're not going to trade Matt Murray.
Not in season, but they might.
No, even in the offseason, that's not going to be part of it, because they have to. Fleury has to provide some teams that he'd be willing to be traded to. So
has to. He has that kind of deal, or does he have?
I think it's a limited no trade clause.
It's a limited. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I hope
It's a no move with a limited no trade. He basically he first has to waive the no move, and then I think it's a list of 6 or 10 teams.
Okay, yeah. So what if he doesn't?
If that's the case, then he just
you're not going to really do that, though. Like how would that possibly, there's the practical application of it. So you say to the team, I'm going to cost you a very valuable asset, and then I'm going to expect to be the number one goalie. It doesn't work like that.
Well, the only option for Rutherford then, if say for example Fleury refuses to waive his no move, is to go to George McPhee and says, okay, what will it take if I give you this? You don't take Murray. So like maybe they give up Derek Pouliot in trade or somebody like that or Daniel Sprong or something like that to prevent them from taking.
But either way, I think that would put that's not I just can't see Fleury doing that.
We all can't, but you never know. Like nothing's ever a guarantee.
No, there is no guarantee. I agree with all that.
Okay, I'll throw that out there. His agent's Alan Walsh. Okay, Marc-Andre Fleury's agent, right? Is Alan Walsh. Not to say that Alan Walsh is known to do controversial type things. Now I don't. And Marc-Andre Fleury is a very, very popular player among the Penguins. I think
yes,
that
he is.
and I wonder what his teammates would say. I don't. It seems as if he wouldn't do that at the end of the day. I think you're right, Kevin.
Yeah. And the other element to it too is he's not the starter there anymore. Like Murray's the guy, and Fleury is still a premium goalie. He's going to want to start, and there are teams that would glad to have him. I mean, who knows? Maybe he wants to go to Vegas. I doubt it, but
I doubt it too.
Yeah, but there are teams obviously that he could play for, and if the Dallas Stars buy out one of their goalies, which we assume they'll do.
But here's the thing. So here's the other caveat. Murray's had a few injuries. What if he has another one before the playoffs?
Well, if they trade him before, the only way they'll trade him now is, and I'm confident in this, is if he's not comfortable being the backup. Like if and it's a soft goalie market, but I think they might have a landing spot for him. I don't know who it is, but there's always somebody. Like Eck and I talk about this all the time. There's always one team that we don't know about.
Yeah,
that's true.
Right? There's and I even though it's a soft goalie market, why it's going to be hard to move goalies because there's no one outwardly pursuing one. There might be someone for Fleury. So if you have that trade available to you, and Fleury says, "Look, I don't want to go through the playoffs again as a backup and all that," then I think you bring in a veteran goalie.
You want to know the great story? You want to know the perfect story for this, and where there is a landing spot for Marc-Andre Fleury? It's in Philadelphia, which is ridiculous because think about the Penguins and the Flyers, right? You say that they would never make a trade together, but Philadelphia has no goalie next year.
Right.
Signed. They have they're not really confident in either of their goalies right now. I mean,
Neuwirth has the edge, but I think you're right.
But if they can get Fleury, he leapfrogs either of them right away.
Yeah, but there is a scenario that mirrors Philadelphia in terms of two unrestricted free agent goaltenders and a goaltending situation that's unsettled, and that's Calgary.
Right.
Because Elliott has not lived up to expectations. Chad Johnson overachieved. They both of them are UFAs. They're in playoff competition. It would make a lot of sense for Calgary to be, and if you want to even go further than that, a team like, I like Hellebuyck, but there is a lot of sense that Winnipeg is looking for a goaltender as well. And I think Hellebuyck was going to be their number one, but they could be on the lookout for a goaltender.
I talked to somebody in Winnipeg who said we have 3 goalies and we have no goalies, that kind of thing. And that's like a fun and interesting thing. So I don't know.
Give Hellebuyck a little time here. I get the problem is Hellebuyck is a young goalie that got pushed into a situation where fans and probably even people in the organization feel like the organization should be further along than they are. But that's not Hellebuck's fault.
Yeah, right? I'm pro Hellebuyck too. I think I think it's just sort of been a bad situation there, and he wasn't quite ready, and he got forced into it. But you still see, like when I watch the Jets play, because I like to watch that team, I find them entertaining. But when I watch them play, like he always makes a bunch of saves that tell you, wow, this kid could be pretty good. And as Russ can tell you, it takes a little while longer for goalies to kind of find their way. And but the goalie situation is interesting because there's Ben Bishop as well, and it's always complicated for the goalies, as my dog seems to be saying. Because they never know. Like Bishop will be out there, Ryan Miller will be out there. They're going to be trying to find a spot for Fleury, and what if if there aren't enough spots available? That just happens. So
suddenly is the goalie who's playing better in Tampa, right? And now suddenly Tampa's looking at the spot like, oh, suddenly now Bishop. I think that's really messed up Tampa a lot because while I think they were ready to trade him, suddenly he's come on as the guy.
Well, and yeah, like they're in it, and also like Vasilevsky, like we think he's great,
Right.
but we haven't seen it.
You don't have a lot there, and Bishop has already taken them to a Stanley Cup final. He's already done. He's already with them. So, now a really fascinating thing comes out a couple hours ago, and this kind of echoes what I've been saying for a little while now, based on what I've been hearing. And so Darren Dreger comes out and says about Shattenkirk, I don't know if you guys saw this or not. He says, "I'm told they've committed to trading him."
Yeah.
For Dreger to say that, this kind of does sort of go back and forth on. Again, I kept saying, like, I talked to people like Andy Strickland, and we've had these guys, and it's amazing how little respect Shattenkirk has, almost giving in among some people in St. Louis, giving you the impression that, like I said, Andy Strickland went on the air on XM and said there are people around here who believe their playoff chances would be just as good without Kevin Shattenkirk, which was like an astonishing thing to hear.
Yeah, but you know what? That's like saying, look, I'm going out to get a car and I'm committed to buying a Corvette, but I still want it at my price. If the price is too high for Shattenkirk, they may be committed to saying that they'll deal him, but if their price isn't met, they're not going to deal him.
Over the first half of this season, I have not heard of one rumor, one scenario where Kevin Shattenkirk re-signs in St. Louis. They're going to spend the money to sign Parayko to an extension this summer, either a bridge deal or a long-term deal. So if there's no prospect of them signing him long-term, then it's either you think you're going to win a Stanley Cup and you keep him, or you trade him because you didn't trade Backes and you didn't trade Brouwer and you didn't get anything for them. And I think that's where Doug Armstrong is. He's got to get assets because he let 2 assets last year go for nothing other than cap space.
I agree with that, and I think there is a scenario here, and it's a kind of scenario that Eck likes. Not a 3-team deal, but you could move Shattenkirk and get maybe the best return out there, as long as Duchesne doesn't get traded, and then turn around and buy another defenseman on a rental basis back, and those would be a lot cheaper. So there's a way to do it and still sort of maintain your competitiveness, to be sure.
Right.
So, and Shattenkirk is crucial to their transition game, but maybe they'll be a better team if they play a little better, solid defensive game. So.
That's the thing, then. That's so strange to me I'm trying to remember a time when a player who was as important as Shattenkirk is to a team, that was a team that was legitimately a contender. This team, they're playing well right now. They're playing well enough to be called a contender. They went to the Stanley Cup semifinals last year. Mm-hmm. They, and when they've traded one of their best players at the deadline,
it has happened.
Marty St. Louis.
Right.
Marty St. Louis.
Yes.
But St. Louis wasn't as important to Tampa as Shattenkirk is to St. Louis.
Oh, I don't know. It was pretty close.
He was their second best forward next to Stamkos.
It's pretty
not
close.
No,
he was. I agree with Mike on that. He was pretty important, but the that was a different situation too, because you were going to make a hockey trade where you got back a guy who helped you in a different way. Callahan, was a more of a playoff style. Not that Marty wasn't, but he was a kind of the gritty leadership guy, and you got back a pretty strong player in return.
Right. Remember, he limited his market to one team, and Yzerman, to his credit, I will always give Steve Yzerman the utmost in credit when he got the return that he got from the Rangers for St. Louis when they were the only team that he wanted to go to.
Yeah, that was crazy. Yep.
Yeah, it really was. You could actually say that Glenn Sather blew it.
I had no problem saying that.
And he did it again with Eric Stahl. I think that he did the same exact thing with Eric Stahl, giving up too much for Eric Stahl as well, in my opinion. And and this is what my article is about today, and this is why I believe Shattenkirk is eventually going to be a Ranger, because players, this Rangers team in their history, and I'm eventually meaning not maybe now, but in the summer, this Rangers team in their history has really gone hard after guys who say they want to be Rangers. They'll go.
Chris Henry.
The only caveat that I can't think of, Ek, is name me a guy that gave up free agency to sign them. He may very well sign with the Rangers. I think the Rangers are number one on his list, but I still think he wants to field all offers first.
Sure.
But the Rangers could pull him in without extending him and feel that they have a good enough chance to keep him there in free agency and take that chance.
Well, even if you don't, I mean, Shattenkirk, the Rangers got to go for it.
Yeah.
Like they do.
Right.
They've got a great offense. They've got Lundqvist. And you add Shattenkirk, you'll be a better team. He'll get the puck to the forward group.
They do need a top power play quarterback. Ryan McDonough is not it, but
I mean, it's
they
hilarious.
didn't have a defenseman with more than 3 goals. So
sorry,
they didn't have a defenseman with more than 3 goals about a week ago when I looked it up.
Right.
And hearing Larry Brooks on the air the other day, he's sitting there saying, I don't think they're going to get Shattenkirk, but the Rangers need is a top line right defenseman who's right-handed who can score and move the puck. All right, so
Okay, sure.
No, but here's the thing. The flip side of this is, yes, they do need to go for it. If they getting Shattenkirk on a similar package that they got Yandel to, and they don't have a year with Yandel like Shattenkirk like they did with Yandel, and still can't re-sign him because even though we all think Shattenkirk wants to go to the Rangers, if all of a sudden someone gives a better offer and they lose him, they will get excoriated because this will be twice then that they've done this, maybe not won the cup. We don't know what will happen if he goes to them, and lost all these assets too. So it's a tricky game.
I mean,
it's tricky, but it depends on what they got to give up.
Right.
Yeah.
And the expected from everything that I've heard, just reading and listening, is the expected rental price is a top prospect and a number 1 pick. And if it's that, and say for example, we're talking the Rangers, you say Buchnevich and their first.
Right.
You can't give that up unless you know for sure you're signing them.
They won't. They wouldn't make that deal.
Yeah.
There's no way.
Yeah, they can't make that deal.
And they would. I don't think they would. I don't think they'd consider that deal.
I mean, they could give him, Ryan Gropp, a kid who's got like 35 goals for Seattle, and a number 1. And I still think it's a little high, but I probably could live with that.
I that's what I think you're going to see. You're going to see a first-round pick and a prospect who's not
a grade B prospect.
Yeah.
Well, or an A minus prospect.
He's like an A minus or a B. He is.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see them giving up a guy off their roster to do it.
It's a fun text, like for those of you guys who like conspiracy theories, which I know Kevin likes, even though he doesn't agree with them.
Yeah,
but
I like to hear them, but I don't. Yeah, usually they don't.
They don't make any sense. But here's a good one, and this is just a text from somebody within the Flyers organization, okay, who says to me, watching the show, and I've got a really strong feeling the Flyers are going to be introducing a new player to the NHL in the outdoor game.
Sure, I don't disagree in that because
now on Saturday.
I came out of last night's game thinking Mark Strite's going to be traded. That was my thought, and I still believe that. And so if that were to happen, then yes, like Robert Hogg or Sam Morin will be playing in the outdoor game.
There's a lot of chatter about Strite in the in the rumor mill. Like when you talk to GMs, he gets brought up. Like it's because it's always funny. It's like we're not interested in him, but I hear
Right.
Yeah, because he's probably the best power play guy other than Shattenkirk that you could get that could really drastically affect your special teams because he still has a great shot. 5-on-5, he still has a great shot, and on the power play, he has a tremendous shot. And there are teams that could utilize that.
Now, here's the question: will Ron Hextall retain salary to get a better return? Because
I don't think they will.
So you're talking you're limiting the number of teams that can take a player, and I think I'm not looking, but I think Strite's at 5.75 or 5.5, something like that. There are not very many teams that can fit that cap.
Well, it's prorated.
Mike, I mean, Russ, there's no reason not to retain salary. I mean,
they're a corporation, Eck, and I think at the end of the day, that's where they may say to Hextall, you can make this deal, but we want to lose this salary.
5.25 he is. 5.25.
But it's prorated.
LA was there last night scouting.
Yeah, but prorating doesn't help you if you're at the cap.
No, that's true.
Right. It doesn't help you at all. But they have to somehow get this number down. I mean, LA was there last night scouting, and the scuttlebutt that was going through the press box was that they were looking at Strite. And another team was there scouting, and they were hoping to look at Del Zotto, and Del Zotto was scratched. So I talked to Scott, who was pissed off about that.
Here's an interesting thought about the Kings too, and it just goes to show you like how important players can become. Even if they're not the greatest players in the world, because what it reminds me of is when Larry Murphy was with the Penguins when they won in '91 and '92. Like you can make a case that he was the most indispensable player on the team because he was the only guy they had that was like him. Like when Mario would go down, as he did with back, if he missed a game, they had Yager, and they had a lot of guys who could do certain things, but they only had one guy who could sort of move the puck up, and that was kind of Larry Murphy. And I forgot where I was going. That's what we were talking about.
That's right. I think you're right. I mean, I think that's incredibly valuable.
Right. So
we live in a transition game, a transitional hockey, and right now the key word is the transition game. I hear it talked about more this year than ever before. People talking about that's like you said, you already said on this show that he's important to their transition game.
Right. Oh, I know the point I was going to make. It was about the Kings have been looking for a puck moving defenseman ever since Moynov had to go back to Russia. Like this has gone on a long time for them.
Even before then, they made the trade for Andres Sekera, giving up a first-round pick.
Yeah,
and that didn't work out. They ended up giving up a first-round pick for a guy who ended up leaving.
I mean, just for the conspiracy theory part, Tom Gilbert was making 1.4. What's the prorated on Mark Streit?
Well, you have to look at the prorated on 1.42. Like it's the same thing, right? So you have to,
it's exactly the same.
So it doesn't matter. Like the prorated,
but they started to clear space is the point.
Yeah. I mean, we don't, I wish I could say I had a real feel for the Flyers. Like a lot of people are texting, the Flyers are going to get Duchesne. They're going to go after Duchesne.
I don't think they're going for a big player. I don't.
But Russ, they didn't even clear out the entire 1.4 of Gilbert.
How much did they retain?
Yeah, they retained $280,000. So they were able to get rid of some of it, but not all of it.
Okay.
I don't have a feel for the Flyers with Duchesne or Landeskog even from last night at all. And I think that the thing is, in order to get a feel for teams, you sort of have to know their motivation. And right now, it's difficult to figure out. Not difficult to figure out the Flyers' motivation, but Hextall his motivation is just patience, right? But usually there's pressure from above.
Right.
And Russ and I were saying we have no idea who it is with that Snyder gone. We have no idea. No Ed Snyder, no Peter Luco, the two people who used to drive that. We don't really know who is pressuring Hextall from above. We don't know if they're saying you got to get a Duchesne in here. We don't know if they're saying that or not. We just don't know. So,
and that's what makes me think, and this is why it's total guesswork, but makes me think they're going to operate like a corporation now. And I've seen the Rangers operated like a corporation in the past.
It is interesting, but the type of ownership does play a role in how aggressive GMs are. I mean, if you look at let's look at Colorado Avalanche. Like I don't view their ownership as being heavily involved in day-to-day operations. So Joe Sakic probably has more freedom, where I'm pretty sure Chuck Fletcher in Minnesota, feels Craig Leopold's presence, and I'm sure Steve Yzerman feels Jeff Vinnick's presence. And I don't mean that from a negative perspective, because I think Jeff Vinnick has complete trust in Yzerman. But Yzerman knows that he's accountable on a daily basis because Vinnick is engaged in the team.
Yeah.
Now, again, I think he completely trusts Yzerman, so I'm not. That's not a negative.
Oh yeah, no, but it does matter because GMs at their if left to their own devices will be patient.
Yeah.
Well, I found it very interesting that it was made very public that Eugene Melnick said the wallet is open to go out and make additions before the deadline, and then Pierre Dorian comes out the same day and says, "Well, we're going to be patient."
Yeah.
So it's like. Yeah, it's like on one hand, you're opening up the possibility of going out and making deals, and then teams think they have the right to fleece you, and then the GM is putting the Heisman on that.
Also is not adverse to spin.
Well, yeah, we know that very well. Yes.
I think in Montreal, for example, there's a lot of pressure coming down, and I think that one of the reasons Montreal's in on Duchesne is that reason. I think the best chance of one of those guys getting moved is not due to. We talked about this yesterday, Kev, not due to Sakic's desperation, but due to desperation of other teams.
I agree, but I do think that Bergevin, and I'd like Russ to weigh on this too, because I know he knows him well too. I think he's naturally aggressive. Like I think in a previous life, Jimmy Rutsky was a horse trader.
Yeah.
Because he enjoys trading. That's what he does. He's really good at it. David Poile is too. But don't you think Bergevin is naturally aggressive? I
do. But he's also fiscally responsible. That's the thing about him. So that's why he's always made deals. but he's always made mid-level deals. We've not seen him now. Like I said, when you weren't on the show, maybe about a week ago, Kev. To me, his big deal, his big acquisition was Radulov. That was when he opened up the pocketbook. So I know he's going to make a deal at the deadline, but I don't know if he's going to make a big deal.
Well, I mean, but as we've said, there is a window there. I mean, nobody thinks Carey Price is going anywhere, but I think he's got one more year left in the contract. Radulov is a free agent at the end of this year. Weber is 31 or 32 years old, so you got a couple years before he starts to tail off from the prime years. Pacioretty is only under contract for a couple more years. There's a window in Montreal. They have to pay Galchenyuk big money at the end of this year. So, I mean, to me, all those factors lend it to Bergevin to be aggressive and go out and make a deal that you think will be a difference maker. Because, I mean, if you don't do it now with the East relatively wide open, I mean, it's Pittsburgh, Washington, the Rangers, Columbus, and Montreal. When are you going to make that move?
Well, he's got a lot of leeway, though, because Price is going to be there for a while. And knowing that, he still may not get overly aggressive this year. He might not.
Yeah, but the difference between Price now and Price after on his new contract is the difference between paying him 5, 7, 5, and 9.
But he's still the same goalie. Like he's
still the same goalie.
You'll lose one player because of his salary, or the cap will go up and you'll be at net zero. But he's the same goalie.
Yeah, and if you got Price, you got a shot.
Right.
So,
and that's definitely the way they think, Kev. I mean, there's no question.
No, and they should. I mean, it's the same thing I feel about Lundqvist.
You have him, you have a chance. There's no doubt.
Yeah, Price is 6.5, so it would be if it's another player. If he's the highest paid goaltender in the NHL on his new contract, which more than likely he'll be, that means $8 million, $8.5 million a year. So that's another player.
Yeah, it'll be like Plekanec will be gone then. Something like that.
Right.
To throw a really crazy prediction.
Before we run off here, I wanted to bring this up because I think everyone will find this quite interesting. Kyle Woodleaf, who is the Red Line Report, which is the independent scouting service, and in full disclosure, he does some stuff for USA Today as well for us. He wrote just a fascinating article this week in his February report that I thought everybody would find interesting. According to Kyle, and I'm sure he did his research on this, in the last 25 years, only one goalie over 6'2", Matt Murray last year, has won a Stanley Cup. Now, he brings that up because, as Russ will tell you, the NHL teams now are loath to take any goalie under 6'3". Like, that's a big thing. And DiPietro is a good goalie this year, and people are sort of downgrading him a little bit. He won't be the top goalie because he is only 6 feet tall. And Kyle just, points out that, that maybe we're being wrong and deciding we should just get, big goalies now. They do take them, but they take them in later rounds. So anyway, I thought that was a really fun statistic. The no goalie other than Matt Murray this year has been over 6'2".
I think it'll change.
Well, it has to, because they've been according to Kyle here, over the last few years, they've been the top goalies have all been 6'3" or tall.
They're giants now. I mean, they're gigantic goalies. It's like the center position in basketball right now. You have to pick the tallest guy to be the goalie. But
to me, it only started like 3 years ago, where everybody decided we have to have at least one guy 6'4" or above in our organization. Like even the Rangers had Jason, Mission, and everybody's got one. Doesn't mean they're all working, but everybody tries to get one and, sign one, draft one. There are some teams that have multiples now. So I think at some point it'll change it. If it doesn't, it'll go back.
I think the team that started the trend was Nashville, because they had Rene and they had the guy who played for Buffalo for a while in Arizona.
Lindback.
Anders Lindback and Mazanik. They had 3 or 4 just giants in the organization. Now, ironically, they have UC Saros, who's like 5'10". He's one of the shortest goalies out there, and he's actually playing well for them as a backup.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw this out there that I think the changing of goalie equipment to be smaller is going to hurt the tall goalies. And I think that will actually play the opposite direction, because usually a lot of the smaller goalies, are I mean, it's part of being tall, you know, and a part of even the equipment now has to do with your size, right? It does play against your size, from what I understand, right? The rules are it has to be a certain. So a taller goalie can have bigger goalie pads than a small goalie, right?
You know, here's the thing. Like, if you're a team and you really like Michael DiPietro, I don't think you're going to take Jake Ottinger over him just because he's taller. Like, I think there has to be an equivalent matchup, and then you say, okay, I have the 6'4" guy, the 6 foot guy. We think they're both comparable. Now I'm going to take the 6'4" guy. But if you Ned Jelkovic is not a tall goalie, but I think he can play in the NHL. Just to use him as an example for Carolina, there's always going to be those guys that could still play no matter what.
Right. I mean, and I think Halak has suffered from his size and been moved around a lot because of his size. You know, and I think a lot of the times you see goalies like Neuvirth, who's not a tall goalie, you know, or players. You know, Bobrovsky's not a tall goalie. You know, there are some goalies out there that are just.
Or you had teams who earmarked goaltenders. Like the Sabres were very interested in Robin Leonard before they made the trade with him because he was a big goalie. The Leafs were looking for a big goalie, and Frederik Andersen filled the bill in terms of being that big number one. Because I mean, we saw from what Mike Babcock how he sort of treated Jonas Enroth for being 5'10". He had 2 bad games and he was done with them. And now he loves his backup Curtis McElhinney because he's 6'3" all the time.
Right. By the way, one of the highest ranked goalies is Keith Primo's kid, Caden Primo.
Caden Primo, yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Who is 6'3", by the way.
Yeah, I think he'll go in the second round too. He will.
So before we get out of here today, one thing I wanted to mention that I think is pretty interesting. You know, this is my last conspiracy thing because I'm going to note this and then we're going to remember this is the day that I said this. That the Pittsburgh Penguins have just traded for their future general manager. That Ron Hainsey will go to Pittsburgh. This is peering into the crystal ball. He will go there. He obviously already knows Rutherford. Everybody knows that Hainsey is you know, there's a general feeling that he's going to be a general manager in the NHL someday. He's one of the sharper guys, right? Remember, he was a big part of the Players Association during the lockdown.
Yeah, very, very smart guy. I think he will be in management. The only thing. Like, that conspiracy is not totally out of whack, other than the fact that, you know, like Billy Guerin is in Pittsburgh waiting in the wings. And
there might be people that get it before that. I might be talking, you know, when we're long gone. But I just think
whoa.
I think we still have time. We still have time with Hainsey before we know it. I mean, I'm not saying he's going to jump in, you know, do a Garcheneau necessarily. But I think that, you know, eventually, I could see it because
you know, if you're going to go that route, I think before we're long gone, I hope cinnamon frosted flakes and pineapple pizza are no longer a thing. I hope that they're abolished before
I'm with you on pineapple pizza. Yeah, because I just don't get that, and everybody likes pineapple.
It's an abomination. In Buffalo, the specialty pizzas, it's pineapple, ham, and maraschino cherries on a pizza. Ugh. It does not belong. I'm sorry.
I can't even. I don't understand the young people.
It's not a luau. It's a pizza.
Chicken. Young people like chicken on their pizza. Barbecue chicken.
Yeah, I mean, I could eat a little chicken parm pizza. I think that's okay. I think that works.
It's not pizza to me. So.
And I don't disagree with that.
You put pasta on top of pizza. Have you seen that?
Yeah, pasta on pizza. I don't get that. I've seen that.
A baked ziti on top of a pizza.
When you cover international hockey and you go abroad, you often get your pizzas and there's fried eggs on it, particularly in France. You'll see fried eggs on your pizza. So.
Man, I do think I'm still my kids are still young enough that I will never eat a pizza again because I lived through but my wife and I were talking about what significant happened from the year 2000 to 2010, and we couldn't remember anything because that's when our kids were so small. It feels like a decade that just didn't exist. And but the one thing I know about, but in that decade, I ate more pizza than I've ever eaten in my life because when you go to kids' parties every weekend, it's nothing.
Cheese and other things.
We've lost the other thing about pizza that when you're an old guy like me and went through the 60s and 70s is we've lost 4 minutes of cooking time. And the reason I say that is because in the old days, you'd cook the pizza where, you know, the cheese would be almost a little burnt and you could actually hold the pizza sideways and the stuff would not fall off. Today you do that because you just wave the flame over it. You turn your pizza sideways and everything comes.
No, that's a great point. That is a great point.
I've heard this theory of yours. I've passed before, Kevin. I've passed it on to others. I do totally agree with you, and I think we're working our way towards.
You gotta just keep it in the oven about 4 extra minutes or 3 extra minutes, and suddenly you got yourself a great pizza.
You'll be fine. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I agree. Well, but for the other thing you're talking about, Russ, my go-to cereal in the morning, if I have a cereal, is Cinnamon Toast Crunch. So,
But that's different, and I'm going to explain why it's different. See, like somebody said, like the Life cereal with cinnamon, that has aeration. So I think because of the aeration, they don't have to go heavy on the cinnamon, because I don't think cinnamon and milk is a great mix no matter what you do.
Actually, yes.
I don't think it is, but with Cinnamon Frosted Flakes, they are so covered with sugar that I think you're going to have to use way too much cinnamon, and I think it just will spoil the recipe. I'm not saying cinnamon cereal shouldn't exist. I'm just saying this recipe, it's not going to be a good one.
I'm going to buy some
I'll bring some extra diabetic meds, Russ.
for trade deadline day. I'm going to buy some and have it that day, and we're going to taste it.
Okay.
But the one other thing, I did buy something for trade deadline day on eBay last night or a couple nights ago. I should not be allowed to go on eBay in the middle of the night. By the way, it should be stopped.
Did you buy Take a Boost, Russ?
That's when I'm dangerous. That's when I'm really dangerous. Like I've woken up and be like, did I order something? Yeah, wait a sec, I did. So anyway, because I'm half asleep, but I found I was like searching vintage hockey stuff, which I always do, because I like to find cool and vintage hockey stuff, and I end up with the NHLPA trade deadline board game, which came out in 2012. Like it was recent. So. Wow. I ordered it on eBay. It'll be here by the trade deadline. So I figured, because this could be a slow trade deadline, we'll bring that out. And actually, I don't know how it works. I don't know anything about it.
I would think Chris Russell has his own piece at this point.
Will you guys all be in the same spot on trade deadline day?
That will be right here on this call, but we will all be in different spots.
Okay, so you're not having a.
So basically, X not inviting me over, Kev, because if he did, I might go, but now he's not. So whatever.
You're welcome to come over.
No, clearly I'm not. So I'm not going to.
I didn't mean to create some. By the way, we never introduced ourselves here.
Russ, you're more than Russ. Why don't you come over? You've never been here, I don't think. All right.
It was so memorable that you can't remember that I've never been there.
Oh, you've been to my other place, but not here.
I've been there more times than you have, Russ.
I know that's true. Remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey. We will talk to you again tomorrow. Follow Kevin at @KevinAllen on Twitter.